My grandfather was a pilot during the Second World War. He flew B-24 bombers over Europe. And on September 27th, 1944, he was a part of what was called the Castle Mission, flying over Germany. And due to some navigation errors, he and the other bombers were separated from their fighter cover. Only a third of the American planes made it back to England that day. My grandfather and his crew were shot down over Germany. Many of his crewmates died in the fight. Many of them were hit by shrapnel parachuting down. Others were captured by civilians in the farmland that they landed in and were killed illegally, again, in war crime. My grandfather was the last one out of the plane, being the pilot, and he too landed in a farm village, was taken by some men, and all of them were threatening to kill him. But a young woman stood up, a teacher, and she intervened, stopped these men from committing that war crime, and led my grandfather to where he needed to go in order to enter into a POW camp for the rest of the war. That woman, that young woman, had every reason to simply stand by and say nothing. It certainly would have not been her fault if my grandfather had have been killed. It took a great amount of courage to stand up, to say something, to speak up on my grandfather's behalf. Many years later, several years ago, my grandfather and several of my uncles went to Germany and saw these places once again and met this young woman, now a very old woman. That Christmas, they showed pictures from their trip. And as this woman's picture came across, my family did something that we rarely ever do. It was very quiet, as we all sat there, recognizing that it was because of this young woman's actions that all of us were there, that all of us even existed, that we had life. I bring this up because today we celebrate another woman who had every reason to stand to the side and to say nothing. A woman who had every reason to stay out of all of it. And yet, the Blessed Virgin Mary had that courage and that strength to say yes to the Lord. Not to simply say, well, let me stand out of the way. Let me not get into the middle of it. There was certainly no real requirement upon her to say yes to the Lord, to say yes to what God had asked her to do, to bear the Son of God. And yet, this young woman had such great courage to stand up and to do what was right. Not just to do what was right for herself, but to do what was right for others. To keep in mind not just herself, but what others needed as well. The Blessed Virgin Mary was kept safe from original sin by a special grace. And sometimes we feel like, well, that means she just lucked out. But what we forget is this young woman, today we celebrate at the end of her life, no longer such a young woman, and yet still equally free from sin. That she not only was born without sin, but throughout her life chose to do not just the minimum of what was required of her, but to always seek that which was good, to seek out the Lord's will, and to follow it, to do what was right, not just for herself, but for others as well. So often, our conception of what it means to be good is what is the least amount of bad I can do and still be good. But what we find in the Blessed Virgin Mary is that she had this great desire, not just to not commit any mortal sins, any serious sins, but to stay completely free from sin, to always do what is right, to always do what is good, to always follow the Lord's ways. This is how we have to change our mentality if we want to follow the example of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That we must change from a people who only want to do what is required of us and to a people who want to always seek what is right and what is good. Not just to do what we are obligated to do, but also to do what is simply good, whether we are required to do it or not. This is why we celebrate today the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, that because she kept herself free from sin throughout her life, because she continually sought the Lord's will, sought to do what was good, whether or not anyone was watching, because of this, at the end of her life, the Blessed Virgin Mary was assumed body and soul into heaven. This is what we hope for ourselves as well. Not just to squeak by, to make it into heaven, but simply to do what is right always, to always seek to avoid sin, not just the big ones, but all of them, so that we too can enjoy with all of our being the goodness of the heavenly kingdom. This is what the Lord calls us to do, and what the Blessed Virgin Mary offers to us as an example today, to seek what is right, even when there is no reason, no cause for us to have courage, for us to stand up in the midst of sin, to stand up anyways, simply out of a desire to follow the Lord. And so we ask the Blessed Virgin Mary to pray for us and to lead us by her example to a deeper love of her Son, to a greater dedication to her Son's will, that we might not only do the bare minimum to get by, but we might always seek what is good, even when it takes courage.